Today we're going to talk about the next world war. This war is predicted in several places in the Bible. The most striking of those predictions in Zechariah chapter 14. There's a few things we should know right off the bat, that this war will take place about Jerusalem, and the Lord says he will bring every nation to battle against Jerusalem. Let's go ahead and read the biblical text.
Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city.
So let's look at the historical context of the prophecy. This prophecy was given during the time of Zechariah's tenure in 520 BC. During the rebuilding of the temple, this is when God raised up Zechariah and Haggai. King Cyrus the Great had previously authorized the rebuilding of the temple, but the work was later halted. It was resumed in the second year of Darius's reign, King Darius, around 520 BC, after the encouragement from the prophets Haggai and Zechariah. When Tattenai, the governor of the province, challenged the project, Darius ordered a search of the archives and found King Cyrus's original decree. Darius then issued his own decree, not only affirming Cyrus's authorization, but also ordering the temple's construction to be funded from the royal treasury. He also mandated that anyone interfering with the work would face severe consequences. The temple was completed in the 6th year of Darius's reign, which is estimated to be at 516 BC. Now, both Zechariah and Haggai were raised up as prophets to encourage the rebuilding of the house of God. They also prophesied about the future plight of God's people. Zechariah 1 opens up with a vision of 4 horns, which tell the entire journey of God's people being totally expelled from the Holy Land and then coming back. Zechariah 1, starting with verse 18. The 4 horns and the carpenters.
Then lifted I up mine eyes and saw, and behold 4 horns. And I said unto the angel that talked with me, What be these? And he answered me, These are the horns which have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem.
The prophet saw 4 horns, and the angel that talked with him made him understand that these horns were symbolical of the Gentile nations, which has scattered Judah, the 2-tribe kingdom, and Israel, the 10-tribe kingdom, and also Jerusalem, the capital city of the 2-tribe kingdom, Judah. In other words, in the symbol of the 4 horns, Zechariah saw those Gentile nations which scattered God's people and destroyed their kingdom. So let's go back to the text. Next, Zechariah is going to see something different than the horns. Starting with verse 20.
And the Lord showed me 4 carpenters. Then said I, What come these to do? And he spake, saying, These are the horns which have scattered Judah, so that no man did lift up his head. But these are come to fray them, to cast out the horns of the Gentiles, which lifted up their horn over the land of Judah to scatter it.
The prophet first saw 4 horns, which perfectly symbolized those Gentile nations which scattered God's people. For horns are used to push and scatter. Afterwards, though, he saw 4 carpenters, thus lending the impression that they have come to build, that this is the business of carpenters. When the prophet saw the carpenters, he wanted to know the purpose of their presence. In his answer, the angel first told him that these carpenters are none other than the four horns, the Gentile nations that he saw previously. So these are the horns that had scattered Israel, Judah, and Jerusalem. And these same horns that scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem have now returned as carpenters to cast out the Gentiles and thus free God's people. It therefore becomes obvious that the four horns which Zechariah first saw point back to the time when Israel and Judah were scattered. And the symbolism of the four carpenters must point forward to a time years later when God is to restore and rebuild the kingdom. Briefly then, the symbolization of the horns looks back to the destruction of the kingdom, whereas the carpenters, looks forward to the repairing of it. The question we ought next to consider is whether the fulfillment of the work of the carpenters took place in the time when the Jews returned from Babylon after their 70 years captivity, or whether it refers to some other time. For you remember that the Jews were scattered and their land was taken, and they went into captivity under Babylon for 70 years of Jeremiah's prophecy, after which they returned and the city was rebuilt. Zechariah says that there were four horns, which would include all the nations that had a part in scattering God's people. And moreover, if this prediction met its fulfillment in Nehemiah and Haggai's time, all the Gentiles would have been driven out forever, but they were not. Besides, the horns were those nations that scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem, and now they have returned to free them and repair the kingdom. And in chapter 2 of Zechariah's prophecy, God declared that not only would his people's kingdom be restored, but many nations would join themselves to the Lord. Since both Israel and Judah did not return, and since other nations did not join themselves to the Lord and his people when the Jews returned from Babylon, we cannot say that this prophecy met its fulfillment in the return of the Jews from Babylon. And since this prophecy has never been fulfilled, it must take place at some future time. Through it all, we see in Zechariah's prophecy a prediction that one day Gentile nations would be engaged in rebuilding the Israelitish kingdom in Palestine, or where the state of Israel is, that was once destroyed. We also see that there is to be a world war in which Gentiles outside of Palestine and the Gentiles within will be involved. In that war, God's people, Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem, are to be delivered and made free, and the kingdom will be rebuilt. That is as plain as anything I have ever seen. In Luke 21:24, we find the words, "And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and be led away captive unto all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled." It is at the time of Zechariah's prophecy is fulfilled, when the four carpenters drive out the Gentiles, that Jerusalem shall no more be trodden of the Gentiles, for their time to occupy the Holy Land shall be brought to its end. Then the Jews are to return and possess the land. Isaiah, Daniel, and Nahum also bear prophetic testimony to the fact that there is to be war and trouble and deliverance of God's people at the time his kingdom is restored on earth. Here we have some notable battles that have been fought at Jerusalem. None, however, have been fought where all the nations of the earth have been gathered to battle, as the text says. So we want to look at the timeline from the time of Zechariah and Haggai. From that time on, we want to look at the battles that Jerusalem has had, or that have been at Jerusalem. So when we're looking at major battles that have taken place in that area, like the prophecy Zechariah 14 talks about, we have the siege of Jerusalem, and this is not a comprehensive list, but this is just some of the notable battles that have taken place. We have the siege of Jerusalem in 63 BC. That's when General Pompey came in and captured the city. That was actually when Rome came in and started ruling that area. We have the siege of Jerusalem. Herod the Great sieged Jerusalem in 37 BC. And then we have 31 AD, the crucifixion of Christ. And shortly after that, in 70 AD, there's the destruction of Jerusalem, which is perhaps the most famous one, where the general Titus destroyed the entire city and the temple, and the Jews suffered a mass slaughter, and others were taken into captivity and scattered. So moving on, we would go to the Crusader period, where the Catholic Church would take on the King of the South, and the Ottoman Empire comes out as victor eventually, and they take that land. But the Crusades are battles between the Catholics and the Muslims. And then we are moving nearer to our time, because after World War I, Britain takes control of that area of Jerusalem. And so Britain begins to create policies to allow the Jewish people that are part of the diaspora to come back and to resettle there. And then especially after World War II in 1948, that's when the state of Israel is born. Now they are supposedly coming up with this two-state solution, but there's a lot of battles that go on between Egypt and Israel and the Palestinians since that time. So in our last study, we learned that the great time of trouble, those represented by Jacob, will be delivered. Now, I revised this chart. There's some revisions to this chart I created to help you understand the timeline. As explained, the time of trouble starts from the dragon's flood, from the apostate brethren in the church, okay? And we're looking at this statement right here.
The present trouble in Laodicea is therefore to spread into Babylon and develop into the time of trouble such as never was, a development which shows that the same satanic power now working in Laodicea will soon fully manifest itself in consolidation with the beast within the churches in Babylon, there to oppose the marking of the second fruits as it is now in Laodicea, opposing the marking of the first fruits.
So we are right here. This is where we are in history. This leopard-like beast is actually the world of today. Now, Adventists have traditionally, they have said this beast is the papacy, is Rome. And it's true, this beast did rise from the papal period. And it went through the 1260 years of the Dark Ages and the papal oppression. And then it received its deadly wound, right? And that represented the Protestant Reformation. But we know that the last stage of this beast is actually when its deadly wound that it developed in the papal times during the Protestant Reformation, when that deadly wound is healed, that represents a rise of despotism in the world of today, in the dominant powers today. So these powers, the horns, are the English-speaking Protestant nations, and there's also some non-English speaking ones, but basically the Protestant nations, the countries that arose from the Protestant Reformation. and they are the dominant world force. But we can see, if we look over here to this scarlet colored beast that's found in Revelation 17, we can see that another power is on the rise. And if you look at this beast, it's all red and it has 10 horns. And then there's this woman, we had a study about that. I'm just going to touch lightly on that. Those horns are communism. And we talked about how the beast started developing in 1929. The horns started coming into the picture. Okay, we started to see the horns, the rise of communism, and especially after World War II, the communist power, Russia, becomes a powerhouse, a superpower throughout the world. So after World War II, we know that this beast is called antitypical Assyria. And this beast in the Bible is actually called Scarlet Beast, but the woman is called Babylon the Great. So Assyria in the ancient kingdoms came before Babylon, okay, in the ancient kingdoms. And this is the time period that we're in right now. So what we have yet to see is that a confederacy must be formed under the Protestant nations. Now, some are doubting whether we have a confederacy here in the United States. Well, I hate to tell you this, but we do have a state confederacy in the United States right now. The deadly wound healing is despotism arising. We just had a landmark decision in the United States today that the Supreme Court took the power of the lower courts to stop President Trump from his executive orders. So it used to be that the lower federal courts could stop the president with their judgments, and they could issue a nationwide injunction saying this is illegal, this is not constitutional. Now the Supreme Court has ruled that they don't have the jurisdiction to do that. So remember, we talked about how the judicial branch is under threat and it might be, dissolved. I find it very troubling that the Supreme Court would rule against their own branch and take away their own power and their own jurisdiction. But this is all part of what we learned in the last study, that during the time in the near future of the scarlet colored beast, that a dictator will rise, and it's going to rise from the United States. Okay, that's the man 666, the two-horned beast. A dictator will arise in the United States. So we have to see the erosion of those civil liberties and those things that basically give us freedom of religion, freedom to move around. And it's all happening for one thing. Right now, their focus is on immigrants and, the LGBTQA agenda, stuff like that. But very soon, it will be turned on the saints of God. So at this time, this is when our time of trouble starts. Well, let me just read this.
It is to be when the purification of the church takes place, during the judgment for the living in the house of God, during the separation of the wheat from the tares, in the harvest time, the time the good fish are separated from among the bad, the goats from among the sheep. In this time of trouble, when every element is at work to bring the time of trouble such as never was, God is to cleanse his church in order to protect his people from the trouble that she is headed for. The people that are left after the sinners are taken, the remnant, shall have perfect peace.
Let me read another statement about the time of trouble. So the winds held back denote the holding back of the image beast activity. When you hear image beast, it's talking about Revelation 13, 15 through 17. And that is the two-horned beast that represents the United States.
it is clear that the hurting by the winds, also the hurting by the angels, both of which are kept back until the 144,000 are sealed, must be figurative of holding back the time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation. Accordingly, God's restraining of the four winds is his holding back the image of the beast's activity, Revelation 13:15-17, against the saints, while his restraining the four angels that they hurt not is his holding back the executing of his vengeance upon the sinners who trouble the church, until after the sealing of the 144,000 is completed. Being coupled, these two hurtings bring the time of trouble such as never was. Revelation 7:1-3, therefore, reveals a twofold conflict: wicked men against God, the blowing of the winds, and God against them, the angels hurting them. But though the blowing of the winds and the hurting of the angels after the servants of God are sealed will bring the time of trouble, yet every one that shall be found written in the book shall be delivered. Dan 12:1. From these facts we see that this time of trouble is held back in order to safeguard the sealing of the 144,000 servants, lest they, the very elect, be brought down to worship the image of the beast or be killed for refusing.
So when we talk about Jacob's time of trouble, it actually develops into the time of trouble such as never was. Okay? Because look at the text. It says Jeremiah 37, alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble. Though it is designated as the time of trouble, yet there is no trouble like it in the respect that none is so great. In this prophecy, God is revealing that before God's people return to their father's land, there should be a time of trouble that will turn all faces pale. It will be a time of trembling, of fear, and of a trouble such as never was. Trouble is coming. It's not going to be a small trouble. Why is it called Jacob's time of trouble? Jacob met his trouble while he was returning to the promised land. Now Jacob is to return again to the promised land with all his household. And again, he is to meet with great trouble. That is why it is called the time of Jacob's trouble. And the trouble is to be exceedingly great. Some of us may think we have hardship now, but the fact is that we do not know what hardship is. We cannot now comprehend or even imagine how great the trouble will be. Alas, for the day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. The trouble actually is what saves him. Then the time of trouble is coming for the good of the latter-day Jacobites. It is coming to deliver them. Though through this most difficult time, it is the man who has the greatest faith in God that will fear the least. Let me say that again. It is the man or woman who has the greatest faith in God that will fear the least. The more faith one has, then the greater will be his deliverance. So these events are detailed by many of the prophets, as was just explained. Daniel calls it a time of trouble such as never was, and he also foretells that Michael shall stand up and deliver everyone whose name is written in the book. Let's look at the history briefly. The 12 tribes lost the earthly kingdom and also subsequently lost their heirship when they rejected Christ. Okay, we're talking about Israel after the flesh. Israel after the flesh. This is when the covenant between God and his people was a fleshly covenant. So they lost the earthly kingdom that God tried to establish in the Holy Land. Remember, he showed Abraham, he said, I'm going to give you this land for the Nile River all the way to the great river Euphrates. And he said, I'm going to give it to your descendants who will be like the sand of the sea. Well, they failed to conquer that kingdom totally. They got comfortable. Then they began to mix with the heathen nations that were practicing vile things according to the religion that God wanted them to have. They were doing stuff like child sacrifice and stuff. And so they did not do what they were supposed to do with the earthly kingdom. And what's worse, they began to adopt the practices of these heathen nations. So God could not let them stay there, could not bless them, and they were scattered. We know the 10 tribes were taken away by the Assyrian nation before Christ even came. And then the 2 tribes are scattered after Christ. In 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem takes place. So let's talk about the Christians though, because there was a remnant of Jews who went on to become Christians. They too were driven from the land, depicted by a woman giving 2 wings and fleeing to the wilderness. That is God's church, the Christians being driven from the Holy Land because of persecution. And also, listen, he prophesied and he said, look, this city is going to be destroyed. When you see the sign of it, don't go back into your house to get your jacket. Jump from rooftop to rooftop, run out of the city. And that's exactly what all the Christians did. They went to the town of Pella, and they escaped that destruction that the Jews endured by Titus. Remember, Revelation chapter 12 gives us the journey of the church, its ultimate purpose, which is to produce a people under the Christian dispensation, a harvest of souls. It shows the controversy between Christ and Satan, the coming of the Messiah, and travels down the annals of time to depict the journey of his followers. So Revelation chapter 12 shows the journey of the church. Going back to Jeremiah 30:18. Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will bring again the captivity of Jacob's tent, and have mercy on his dwelling places, and the city shall be builded upon her own heap, and the palace shall remain after the manner thereof. The city shall be rebuilt, and the palace shall remain. The Lord calls those in the church who have not despised their birthright, Jacob, or the house of Jacob in prophecy. So we have an antitype pictured, and that's why God consistently prophesies and calls those who are faithful in the church Jacob. Okay, because it's showing the journey that we have to go through. We're going to be called to a wilderness journey where we're going to have to suffer some things, but at the end is the kingdom, right? And so if you look at the type, those that will vex Jacob are the Esauites, and that's why the earliest statement that I read, which talks about our time of trouble, starts from Laodicea, and then it develops into the time of trouble such as never was. We need to understand that during the times when things get more stringent in this country and throughout the Assyrian nations, as they begin to change more into a religious state, there's going to become a time when what we're teaching is going to become an offense, because we are going and we're telling them, say ye not a confederacy to all them that say a confederacy. We're saying don't join it. We're telling everybody in the church don't join. And this causes the ire to be turned upon us.
Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will bring again the captivity of Jacob's tents, and have mercy on his dwelling places. And the city shall be builded upon her own heap, and the palace shall remain after the manner thereof. And out of them shall proceed thanksgiving, and the voice of them that make merry. And I will multiply them, and they shall not be few. I will also glorify them, and they shall not be small.
They are going to multiply in this kingdom and be a great people. So if you have been studying with us, you remember that the study of Zephaniah 2 is about what will happen to the Holy Land and preparation to us getting there. In verse 1, Zephaniah 2 verse 1, one nation is predicted to gather themselves there. This denotes that this is not a gathering that God is doing, because they are doing it of themselves. At the same time, in verse 3, God shows another group who he tells to seek meekness in the time of this nation's self-gathering. And then in verse 4 and 5, God shows that there will be war there and the areas therein that will suffer destruction. Okay, so if we look at verse 4, I want you to look at verse 4. First of all, let's look at verse 1.
Gather yourselves together, yea, gather together, O nation not desired. Before the decree bring forth, before the day pass as the chaff, before the fierce anger of the Lord come upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger come upon you.
I find it interesting that God says he calls them a nation. Gather yourselves together, O nation not desired, because that's exactly what the state of Israel is. It's a nation, but it's not a nation that God recognizes as his own people, because to his people, he's speaking in verse 3 simultaneously as he's speaking to this nation who is gathering of themselves. He says,
Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be, ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger.
Now I want you to pay attention to what's going to happen to this land.
For Gaza shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon a desolation. They shall drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up.
Verses 6 and 7 show that these areas will be inhabited by the 144,000, God's new leadership for the church, for they are called shepherds. Look at verses 6 and 7. He's bringing someone else in.
And the sea coast shall be dwellings and cottages for shepherds, and folds for flocks. And the coast shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah. They shall feed thereupon. In the houses of Ashkelon shall they lie down in the evening. For the Lord their God shall visit them, and turn away their captivity.
So let's read a few more verses in the chapter. Look at verse 8 and 9. 8 and 9.
I have heard the reproach of Moab, and the revilings of the children of Ammon, whereby they have reproached my people, and magnified themselves against their border. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, surely Moab shall be as Sodom, and the children of Ammon as Gomorrah, even the breeding of nettles, and salt pits, and a perpetual desolation. The residue of my people shall spoil them, and the remnant of my people shall possess them. This shall they have for their pride, because they have reproached and magnified themselves against the people of the Lord of hosts. The Lord will be terrible unto them, for he will famish all the gods of the earth, and men shall worship him, every one from his place, even all the isles of the heathen.
Not only the unbelieving Jews, but also the unbelieving Arabs who resist the meek are to be swept away from the land. While Moab and Ammon become as Sodom and Gomorrah, go out of existence, the captivity of God's people is turned away. They become an independent nation and possess all the wealth of the people round about. So in this last great war, let's review the main groups. In Zephaniah 2, there are 4 major groups that are mentioned. First mentioned is the nation not desired, right here in the middle. Since the chapter opens up with God addressing this nation, which we know is the state of Israel, who began to gather itself in the early 1900s and especially after World War II, we can know that this final great conflict between the nations starts because of this gathering. The second group is addressed. This is this group right here, so they can get ready that when they see the sign of this gathering of this nation, they should understand that the kingdom is soon to be set up. Another group that is addressed is Moab and Ammon here at the end. The Muslims who dwell along with the unbelieving Jews in the areas specified. God declares that he is against both groups, but says specifically he will be terrible towards Moab and Ammon because of their reproach and pride against his people. Now they would destroy them if they could, as they believe they have ownership of the land, as do the Jews. But God will override both of them in order to bring his true people there. If you go further in the chapter, you can see that God also talks to Assyria and the Protestant nations and Nineveh, which is America. Nineveh was the capital city of Assyria, okay? Nineveh was the capital city of Assyria. So who is the leader of the Protestant nations? I don't think anybody would argue that America is the leader of the Protestant nations, the capital city. Now Nahum reveals more details about what causes Assyria and Nineveh's downfall.
And he will stretch out his hand against the north and destroy Assyria, and will make Nineveh a desolation and dry like a wilderness. And flocks shall lie down in the midst of her, all the beasts of the nations. Both the cormorant and the bittern shall lodge in the upper lintels of it. Their voice shall sing in the windows. Desolation shall be in the thresholds, for he shall uncover the cedar work. This is the rejoicing city that dwelt carelessly, that said in her heart, I am, and there is none beside me. How is she become a desolation, a place for beasts to lie down in? Everyone that passeth by her shall hiss and wag his hand.
Okay, so we need to understand that God is talking to the Protestant nations, okay? And their reign, their worldwide power is soon to wane because of this war. They're going to lose out in this war. And let me go to Isaiah 31, where he talks more about how Assyria is going to fall. Okay, so remember, it's a city that dwelt carelessly and says, I am, and there's none beside me. So the arrogance and pride of this power is so vast that heaven takes note of it. Isaiah 31, 7, 8.
For in that day every man shall cast away his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which your own hands have made unto you for a sin. Then shall the Assyrian fall with the sword, not of a mighty man, and the sword, not of a mean man, shall devour him. But he shall flee from the sword, and his young men shall be discomfited.
When this idolatry is cast away by every man, the Assyrian will fall by the sword. In the time when God pleads for his people to return to him, and when they do it, then the Assyrian will fall, not before that. It was because of their idolatry that they lost the land in the first place, and God is not going to bring his people back to their land with their idolatry. Therefore, we and all God's people must not delay in putting away our idols. We had better cast them out and be ready on time to go to the place where it will be so much better than it is in the present world. For there none will be tired or sick or lonely or afraid. It's talking about the kingdom. Let's read verse 8 again.
Then shall the Assyrian fall with the sword, not of a mighty man, and the sword, not of a mean man, shall devour him. But he shall flee from the sword, and his young men shall be discomfited.
The Assyrian will fall by a sword, which God himself shall send. Assyria will not fall under a mean man. His fall will come under circumstances that will clearly show that God has caused it to happen. When ancient Israel fell, it was God who brought it. It was God who was responsible for it. So it will also be with Assyria unless she too turns to God. Moreover, it is a vain thing for them to look to some other nation for help. None can stay God's punishment. Only God can help at such a time. And remember, they are also known, America is known as the King of the North in prophecy in Daniel 11. And they will come to their end and none shall help them, the prophecy says. Now, this doesn't mean that it will cease to exist, because it resurrects itself during the time of the scarlet colored beast that we looked at. Now let's review what has happened recently with this latest conflict in Israel. People have asked, is this the conflict that we're looking for? Let's look at the facts. The following information is from Botanical Encyclopedia, but I want to point you to these verses right here on the side. And this is taken from Zechariah 14:2 and Zephaniah 2. And there are several factors that are found in verses. Okay, it says the city shall be taken, the houses rifled, and the woman ravished. Half of the city shall go into captivity, perhaps taken prisoner. Talking about Jerusalem. And then in Zephaniah 2:4, we just read about Gaza will be forsaken. Ashkelon is going to become a desolation. They're going to drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up. And then it says, woe unto the inhabitants of the sea coasts. So basically, if we were to say this in plain English, the city will suffer some type of warlike assault, taken, houses ransacked, women victims of sexual assault. That's what ravish means. Half of the city shall go in captivity, may be taken prisoner, but there will be a remnant of Jews who come into the truth. After all, this message started with them, and Gaza will be forsaken. So let's talk about this. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas led a stunning coordinated attack, which took place on Shemini Atzeret, a Jewish holiday that closes the autumn Thanksgiving festival of Sukkot. Many IDF soldiers were on leave, and the IDF's attention had been focused on Israel's northern border rather than the Gaza Strip in the south. The assault began about 6:30 a.m. with a barrage of at least 2,200 rockets launched into Israel in just 20 minutes. During that opening salvo, Hamas used more than half the total number of rockets launched from Gaza during all of 2021's 11-day conflict. The barrage reportedly overwhelmed the Iron Dome system, the highly successful anti-missile defense system deployed throughout Israel, although the IDF did not specify how many missiles penetrated the system. As the rockets rained down on Israel, at least 1,500 militants from Hamas and PIJ infiltrated Israel at dozens of points by using explosives and bulldozers to breach the border, which was heavily fortified with smart technology, fencing, and concrete. They disabled the communication networks for several of the Israeli military posts nearby, allowing them to attack those installations and enter civilian neighborhoods undetected. Militants simultaneously breached the maritime border by motorboat near the coastal town of Zech. Others crossed into Israel on motorized paragliders. About 1,200 people were killed in the assault, which included families attacked in their homes and attendees of an outdoor music festival. That number largely comprised Israeli civilians, but also included foreign nationals. As of March 2024, the United Nations report found evidence that some were victims of sexual violence before they were killed.
Tonight, the disturbing footage from October 7th showing Hamas terrorists inside an Israeli military base. 7 female soldiers covered in blood and bruises are up against a wall. They're handcuffed and terrified.
Where from?
18-year-old Liri Albag trying to speak while the women are receiving death threats.
That's what you mean?
What?
I don't know.
What?
The gunman leering at the women, telling them they're beautiful. The UN has said Hamas committed rape and sexual violence against its victims. It's unclear if that happened in this case. On the video, you can hear gunfire as the women are abducted into Gaza. Of the 7, 1 was rescued and another found dead. The remaining 5 still in captivity 229 days later.
Adding to that trauma was the fact it was the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. This is the Israeli response. At 8:23 a.m. on October 7th, 2023, the IDF announced a state of alert for war and began mobilizing its army reserves, eventually calling up more than 350,000 reservists over the next few days. 2 days later, IDF fighters began conducting airstrikes in the Gaza Strip. On October 8, Israel declared itself in a state of war, and Netanyahu told residents of the blockaded enclave to get out now. We will be everywhere and with all our might. On October 9th, Israel ordered a complete siege of the Gaza Strip, cutting off water, electricity, food, and fuel from entering the territory. So I want to show you a little video. What we're seeing now is the aftermath of Israel's bombing campaign, its offensive to Gaza since October 2023. In short, that beautiful coastal part of the region is totally decimated. It looks like something out of a apocalyptic movie. Buildings are reduced to rubble. Before, it was a well-populated, densely populated city with high rises, many buildings, homes, recreational centers and businesses that are on the beach, ports, you name it. This could be any city or coastal city in the US that is, they're beautiful. Well, Gaza doesn't look like this anymore. It is a war-torn, decimated landscape. All of the hellish power Israel could muster came upon these people, these displaced people. Men, women, and children have been slain indiscriminately. So as you can see, and I'm sorry if that disturbs some people, Gaza has been totally decimated. And we can see that the fulfillment of Zephaniah 2 is right here, fulfilled in our day. So continuing on with the question, has Gaza been forsaken? Because of the Israeli blockage, many organizations that would surface the war-torn area to get food, medicine, and other supplies into Gaza can't get to them. It's been very hard. Therefore, approximately, and some say the number is larger than this, 54,000 Palestinians have died because of this conflict. And it's very dire. People are dying of starvation every day. When they go to the aid trucks, Israel will attack, the aid trucks, and people are killed every single time. Just watch a short excerpt of this. Now, what we're seeing, for those of you who are just listening, we're seeing a populated area, a clinic that's servicing, packed to the brim, full of patients, and also of children who are malnourished or starving.
Every day, the cries of hungry children fill the halls of Kamal Adwan Hospital in North Gaza. Some children here at the malnutrition clinic have never known a full meal in their lives. After the Hamas attacks on October 7th, Israel cut off fuel, food and water from Gaza. Within weeks, starvation had spread in the north. Israel doesn't allow foreign journalists into Gaza, so we worked with Palestinian reporters who filmed for us at Kamal Adwan Hospital in June. Abdul Aziz is 5 months old and starving. Dr. Ahmed Nasser has been taking care of him with what little resources the hospital has on hand.
We're seeing a malnutrition baby who cannot absorb anything in his body. Anything that enters into his body is excreted without benefit to him, the doctor is saying. The doctor says his mother brought him to the hospital because the child was suffering from chronic diarrhea, vomiting, and a high body temperature. He says many times we were shocked to see 30 to 40 cases in one day for the same reason. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the Ethiopian crisis where the Ethiopian children were starving. This is what it looks like in Gaza for the children there.
On the second day of filming, Abdul Aziz's heart stopped. Doctors resuscitated him, but he remained unconscious in intensive care. The following week, on June 30th, Abdul Aziz al-Hurani died. He was one of at least 38 people in Gaza who've died of malnutrition since October 2023.
And I know that is very disturbing. I've been watching the situation in Gaza. Don't just watch American news. They're not going to show you what's going around the world. And that's so true. You cannot see what is actually going on with that war that's happening inside of Israel, that Gaza war. You just can't see it unless you go to those other channels. And so when I started looking at what's going on, it is just absolutely terrible. It's genocidal, and they are basically, there's so many civilians that have died, so many children. Gaza has the largest amount of child amputees in the world right now. It's like the worst. And nobody can get out unless they have a certain amount of money or they have citizenship elsewhere where maybe their country can work on their behalf. So it's just a very dire situation where it's been totally decimated, no food and water. They have to rely on everything being brought in on trucks and stuff. And a lot of disease is rampant. Polio is coming back in that area because of the refugee camps and stuff. A lot of disease spiking up in there. So recently we saw the expansion of the war between Iran and Israel, and they've traded hostilities for a while now, but the most recent expansion was most striking because the U.S. assumed an active role in bombing Iran. Currently, we are in a ceasefire, but we know not how long it will last. Israel has started concentrating on Gaza again, with dozens being killed on a daily basis. Like I said, most of these people are just going to the aid trucks to get food, water, gasoline, medicine, whatever they can, and they're killed while they go there. Geopolitical experts on the crisis say that since the airstrikes conducted by the U.S. only set back Iran for a short period of time, like months, the U.S. will again consider an offensive on Iran. And we know that China and Russia was not pleased with this. Iran supplies China with most of its oil at a discounted price. Russia has threatened to give Iran a nuclear warhead as they are allies. Pakistan is looking closely at the situation too and are more friendly to Iran. Here we can see how every nation could easily get involved, which is exactly what the scripture says. From what we can see, this definitely looks like the war described in Zephaniah 2 and Zechariah 14. Gaza is already forsaken. It's forsaken. The world, it took a long time for even the world community, the UN, to start speaking out against the atrocities that were happening under Israel's onslaught of Gaza. It's a humanitarian crisis of the level, let's say, like what we saw in World War II. It's getting to that point. Okay, we might not have all the concentration camps yet, but what's going on, the slaughter of these men, women, and children is just, it's very sad. So everybody kind of expects war to be continual. Okay, so when they have a ceasefire, everybody kind of relaxes and says, oh, this is not it. This is not the war. And then they relax and they quiet their fears. But I believe that it is dangerous to do so at this point because we have too many things lined up in prophecy that have met their fulfillment in recent current events. Okay. And we'll go through a list. Number one, the king of the north, the last king of the north, Daniel 11:45, USA will be in the Middle East and plant his tabernacles between the two seas. We know that recently Trump announced his plan jointly with Netanyahu to take over the Gaza Strip, and he calls it Trump Gaza, and has claimed U.S. ownership of the Gaza Strip. His plan is to displace the Palestinians somewhere else. And he says they're going to be given new houses. However, these people do not like the plan. The Palestinians do not agree with Trump's plan. This is the first time the U.S. has taken an active role in claiming the land there. They kind of just have been helping Israel and fighting wars by proxy by supplying their weapons. But now the United States is really taking a strong, active role in this Middle East crisis and having to do directly with this land, which is between the two seas. Gaza represents, okay, Gaza is forsaken, number two. Gaza represents the #1 humanitarian crisis in the world right now. It's one of the #1 humanitarian crises, with starvation, disease, and violence plaguing its inhabitants. The genocide that is taking place there is labeled by some as a new Holocaust. Okay, number 3, U.S. Assyria. U.S. is the capital city of Assyria. Involvement in the war. The U.S., antitypical Nineveh, moved from a backseat role to an active role and bombed Iran, a sovereign nation in the region. And the 4th signpost that we need to be looking at is that the Confederacy of Church and State is already in place in the Two-Horned Beast territory, the USA. The U.S. is in the process of adopting or changing into a more religious state, a conservative Christian government. The state and the church have already organized in organizations such as ALEC or Project 2025. So they have been organized, and Trump started a religious liberty commission on which Ben Carson in Adventist is the vice chair. He has one of the top positions on this committee. So church and state, and it's a panel of evangelical leaders and politicians, and also there's a cardinal on there as well, a high-ranking Catholic official. So they're all working together to. Their approach to religious liberty is one that is totally opposite of what the nation is founded on. They believe that the church should have more power and be able to compel people to follow Christian standards. In fact, their first meeting was a dual meeting with the Department of Justice, where Pam Bondi said that the Department of Justice will be the tip of the spear to legislate, enforce religious, quote, liberty. Now, we know that this does not have to do with separation of church and state. In fact, it's the combining of it. And to think that the church would take a punitive stance and use the government, such as the Department of Justice, to enforce its decrees, we have reached that point in America that we have been looking for. It's here. So let's go to Jeremiah 25 briefly, okay? Because this is really important. I need you to get this. I know we're kind of going a little bit longer than we usually do. Jeremiah 25:32 reveals war. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, behold, evil shall go forth from nation to nation, and a great whirlwind shall be raised up from the coasts of the earth. Evil will go forth from nation to nation, for God will call for a sword upon all the inhabitants of the earth. It means war. Verse 33, and the slain of the Lord shall be at that day from one end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth. They shall not be lamented, neither gathered nor buried. They shall be as dung upon the ground. This verse is not describing the conditions that will prevail as a result of the coming of the brightness of the Lord when he comes in the clouds. This is a slaughter from the great whirlwind of Jeremiah 25:32, the previous verse. It is from war. Why should the Lord first bring this on Judah and Jerusalem and then to the nations? Because they had the greatest light, and therefore they had the least reason to be wicked. Then when this war starts in the time of the deliverance of God's people, the most enlightened people will suffer first. Please return now to Jeremiah 30:23. Behold, the whirlwind of the Lord goeth forth with fury, a continuing whirlwind. It shall fall with pain upon the head of the wicked. This whirlwind is warfare which does not arrive and then quickly die out. It stays long. It is to start in the latter end of the time God's people are scattered among the Gentiles just before his people are delivered. Jeremiah 31, verse 1. At the same time, saith the Lord, will I be the God of all the families of Israel, and they shall be my people. The people that were left of the sword found grace in the wilderness, the Gentile world, showing that the sword fell while the people were still in the Gentile nations. Those that were left will be restored to their own land. It is in the time when the true ones of Israel are left and find grace with God. So we read a number of scriptures here today. Now let us very briefly summarize what we learned from it. We learned the time of Jacob's trouble, that the kingdom will be set up in a time of war. The whirlwind and the sword, war, is the evil, the curse that is to be sent to all the nations to whom the Lord shall send it. The evil, war, is to go from nation to nation and is not to be short duration. Number 5, God's people will be delivered in a time of great trouble. Number 6, they must cast away all idolatry as a prerequisite to being delivered. Number 7, the Gentiles will have their trouble when they are called out of Babylon. Today's study mainly dealt with Jacob's own trouble and about his being delivered from the Syrian yoke. The great and dreadful day of the Lord is fast coming. We talked about that great and dreadful day. It is dreadful for the people who will not make it into God's kingdom, but it's great for those who will be saved and say, "This is our Lord, yea, who we have waited on." So I want to go back to the timeline. Again, we are right here under this Isaiah 8 Confederacy. Okay, it's already formed in the United States. If you did not get the email that I sent out, you can put your email in the chat and I'll send you out the evidence for that is already in place in the United States. The only thing that hasn't happened is the Constitution has not been fully dissolved, which we expect sometime during this trouble. Okay, so the trouble starts with the dragon's flood, with the tares in the church, the apostate brethren. They turn informer or things like that. You'll see things change when the atmosphere of the nation becomes one of Big Brother, or what do you call it, the Red Scare, things like that in the past that have happened, but it's just going to be a lot greater. The pressure is going to be a lot more extreme. And then with the government changing and sliding into despotism, the protections are not going to be in place for individual citizens. And we don't know that about the personal journey that we may go through. I mean, some of us might be thrown in prison, but we do know that if you're building your relationship with God now and learning how to trust him, and all these smaller issues that you come across, whether they be trouble with family, trouble with your job, trouble with finances, we have a lot of troubles that we're dealing with as Jacobites in preparation to this larger trouble that's about to happen. And some of us may wonder, why do we always have to go through this? Why is it one moment, it's like never a moment of peace, like we're always going through some drama? And that's because God is trying to prepare us. Because if we develop that trust and faith with God right now, then that time is going to be so much better for us, and we'll have the greater deliverance. Okay, so we may not understand it all. I remember when I went through church trials for a period of almost a decade, and I received this message, and I knew it was the last message to the church. I knew it was a message from heaven. And I was so young that I didn't really think much of it, but I used to hand out booklets at church. Well, one day somebody reported me, and then began my trouble. Okay? I was never ever allowed to attend church in peace from that point on. I went on several trials. At first, I would be watched like a hawk. The pastor would follow me or send people to follow me, taking notes on everything I said, when just fellowshipping or participating in Sabbath school or doing anything of that nature. And then eventually that would culminate to a church trial, a church board trial. So I went to 3 different churches and went to 3 church board trials. Okay. And it took a great toll on me, the last of which was probably the worst because I was actually thrown off of church property. And I remember during that time, I cried and I cried and I cried. And my husband was so dismayed. You know, he began to get filled with a hate towards the Adventist church. And, you know, it was cause for me to backslide, and not saying that I'm not excusing that, you know, because we have to learn how to be faithful in difficulty. But it was the cause because, you know, I was, I think because I was so young and just inexperienced with life itself, that I went through a Great Depression for a period of 10 years. And I remember I couldn't trust anyone or anything. It was very hard for me to get comfortable. And I used to go into church. I continued going to church throughout all this time, but I actually started having panic attacks when I entered into the church. And they would come upon me and I would start sweating. My heart would start beating fast. It was excruciating. And at that time, I didn't really believe in medicine like that. I believed more in holistic herbal remedies. So I never took any anxiety medicine during this time. And I guess things came to a head because I kept on trying to go to the world for comfort, but there was no comfort to be found there. There was no peace there. There was no lasting love there, and things in my life started to fall apart. So God brought a whole bunch of trouble to me, basically just because of I was living in sin. And I started having trouble on my job everywhere. And, you know, I've told some of you guys this, that I became a whistleblower, and 3 of my coworkers died. And then the next job I went to, the other teacher on my team committed suicide. So it was just devastating blow after blow after blow. That was pretty traumatic, but it was all for my own good, right? God was trying to push me out of my comfort zone and into his will. So I get started with helping my mom with the ministry. And at the point in time, I'm just trying to help her. And I'm not even thinking about being a leader, you know, at all. I'm just like, let me help my mom so she can get out of this mess, and we'll find some better than us to basically take over. And that just didn't happen because God had a plan. So we kept on going through trouble with those that we put into place because we thought we were wise and we thought we could pick who the leaders need to be. And during that time, that was my training. We went through legal battles and people having lawsuits against us, and the stress that came from that, from doing legal battles and stuff like that. I look at that now because I had a legal battle when I was a whistleblower. I headed an investigation, and I had a legal battle as soon as I started helping the association. You know, so I looked at that and I said, wow, you know, it's enough to make your hair fall out. But now I realized that God was training me to be a strong leader. I realized all of it. I see his providence. I remember times when I used to just cry when, you know, for what the church was doing to me and the friends that I lost. I just used to cry, and I just wish I could drive and never come back to my city. I wanted no one to know me. And the only thing that kept me going was my 3 kids. That was the only thing, you know, and I know that you say God kept me going. Yes, that's true. But they were the only reasons that I decided to continue living. I always thought about my 3 kids, and I said they would never be able to deal with their mother if she took her own life or did anything like that. I would think about those kids, and I loved those kids so much that I would turn away from that as being an option. I loved them so much, and I would think about them. My kids were my heart. So I think about those times where I used to cry and I used to say, why God? And I used to beg him, Lord, please let me be able to, you know, have community with my church again and let them accept my membership back. And I mean, I was really messed up about it. And, but now I understand it all, because we have got to stop being fearful of standing up for the truth. Those of us who are yes men, who will just obey without any type of respect to what God actually wants, the respect for his truth, respect for this final message that came down from heaven, the judgment of the living. If we're not willing to suffer for it now, do you think that in the time of testing, when the government is saying, hey, we're gonna throw you in jail, or you're gonna lose your house if you don't do this, if you don't capitulate, are you gonna stand up then if you've been saying yes all this time? No, you're not. No, you're not. This is training now. So now is the time for you to stand and to begin reading your Bible and to begin praying and to begin doing the things that the Lord wants you to do. Some of us are not, maybe you're not at the point in your walk with God where you're ready for a fight, and that's okay. You know, God knows where you're at. I wasn't ready for it either. But understand, if God brings you to a valley of decision, to a crossroads where you had better be up to the task. I remember I had a lot of people just telling me, recant, just say you won't, just do this. And my forehead was like flint, like the scripture says. I said no. And I was very young. I was in my 20s. I said, no, I will not. I will not deny God's truth. See, this is the same faith that the martyrs had, okay? But I want to give you a promise that even though we're called for that type of courage in the face of death, we actually are not going to experience death. We actually are not going to experience death. Revelation 9:6 says, in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. Is it not logical to believe that the reason these men could not die is that they are sealed by God? What else can make men live on, and no one could kill them? Who other than God can give life? And do you suppose that God is going to extend the life of the wicked? He promises to do that only for the righteous, those having the seal of God in their foreheads. Then these that seek death and cannot find it are God's people. They are to live on for eternity. At what time will they be made invulnerable to death? Our study today makes it plain that it is during the fifth trumpet and before the sounding of the sixth trumpet. If God is going to do this during the period of the fifth trumpet, then the sealing of the 144,000 must take place in the period of the fifth trumpet and not the sixth. It is then before the sixth angel sounds that some will have the experience of seeking death and not finding it. But now in this period, before the sixth angel sounds his trumpet, some men are to seek death, and they will not find it, and desire to die, and death would flee from them. They just could not die, for they would be immune to death. Since we understand that God is going to find a living church besides those who are righteous, when he comes, he's going to come to a living church, saints. We are talking about the judgment for the living. We have passed from the judgment of the dead to the judgment of the living. We're talking about the generation who's going to live through these things. We live through the trouble. We live through Jacob's time of trouble, and we live through the mark of the beast. And guess what? We're established in the kingdom, triumphant. the Lord is going to find a living church besides those righteous who are lying in their graves, then from that we could also easily conclude that these people during the fifth trumpet could not die, and they will live through the sixth trumpet too and never die. So it goes on to say that God puts a seal on the 144,000, okay? And that seal is not, it's to protect them from everything and everybody. That's what preserves them during the time of trouble. During the time of the evil war that goes from nation to nation. This is the security that God is asking us to actually value and work for. And how do we work for it? By building our trust in God. Religion is not something that is just conceptual. It's actually something that you do on a daily basis. It's putting your feet to the pavement and every day saying, no matter what, God, I'm going to obey. I'm going to trust. And you know what, Lord? Even if I have stuff on me that I haven't got rid of, even if I'm still smoking cigarettes, even if I'm still drinking, even if I'm still having premarital sex, even if I'm still doing some things that I know I should not be doing, Lord, I'm saying, here I am. Take me, Lord, and I'm going to do the next thing that you tell me to do. God did not bring me out of my sin and pluck me out as an angel of the fire. No, he plucks me out as a hellion, a brand from the fire. And then he began to whittle away things little by little. Little by little. I just started saying, okay, God, I'm gonna obey you. I'm gonna help with the work. I'm gonna do what I can, that you're showing me to do. And everything hadn't fell off. But you know what I found? In being obedient to the call of God on my life, the desires for sin fell away with time. So now God has brought me to a point in time where everything that I do, I ask God before I do it. And whatever he tells me to do, I'm going to try to go and do in faith. No matter what type of resistance I may have, God has told us to do many things that did not make sense. Remember, this work is going to be completed contrary to all human planning. And she's had people contend with her. I have even said with some things, I don't know if that's gonna work. It sounds like a cockamamie scheme. And then I say afterward that the Lord was working through it. So we talked about this in one of our other studies. God is looking for those that have radical faith in him to do what he says to do. Stop worrying about what everybody else has to say about it and just listen to God. That's what he's looking for. And it's too late in the day to play around with him about this.